April 7th, 1924. Hollywood, California. The lot of Paramount Pictures on Marathon Street. 7:43 a.m. The lot had the specific quality of a place that is simultaneously several different places at once, which was the quality that a film studio lot in Hollywood in 1924 had by necessity. The necessity being the production of worlds that did not exist in the space of a city block. The worlds being constructed and dismantled and constructed again with the specific efficiency of an industry that had learned in 15 years what other industries took 50 to learn, which was that the speed of production was itself a form of quality when the product was dreams, and the market for dreams was every person in every city, in every country, who could afford a nickel and 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. There were 3 standing sets visible from the main gate, a New York street and a medieval castle, and the exterior of a French café. The 3 coexisting in the morning light, with the specific matter-of-fact quality of things that have stopped being strange through familiarity. The people who worked on the lot moving past the medieval castle on their way to the French café, the way office workers move past the furniture in an office, with the purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be, and the indifference of people for whom the surrounding has become background. Francis Doyle was 23 years old and had been in Hollywood for 14 months, which was long enough to understand the specific character of the industry, and not long enough to have stopped being surprised by the things about it that were worth being surprised by. She was from a small city in Ohio called Zanesville, and had come to Hollywood in February of 1923 with $80 and the specific determination of a woman who has decided that the life available to her in Zanesville is not the life she intends to have, and who has identified the place where the life she intends to have is being made and has gone there. She was a title writer, which was what the industry called the people who wrote the intertitles that appeared between the filmed scenes in silent pictures, the titles being the words that the pictures could not speak. The specific art of the title being the compression of a scene's emotional content or narrative information into 12 words or fewer, in a font that had to be readable at the back of a theater by a man who had not slept well the previous night and was eating peanuts from a paper bag. She was good at it. This was not a modest assessment, but an accurate one, the accuracy being what Frances brought to assessments of her own work the way she brought it to everything, without the inflation that insecurity produces, and without the deflation that false modesty requires, both of which she considered forms of dishonesty and therefore not available to her as options. She had been hired by Paramount in November of 1923 after submitting a portfolio of sample titles to the story department. The portfolio having been assembled over 8 months of writing titles for pictures she had seen in the theaters on Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset, rewriting the titles that she thought were wrong, and writing titles for the scenes that had none, the portfolio being a form of audition, she had designed herself because the formal audition process for title writers did not exist, and she had therefore created one. The story editor, who had read the portfolio, a man named Gerald Cross, had offered her a position the same day he read it, which told her something about the portfolio and also about Gerald Cross, who was one of the people in the industry she had identified as someone who recognized quality when it was in front of him and acted on the recognition, rather than waiting for someone else to act first. She was walking to the story department building at 7:43 on the morning of April 7th, with a folder of revised titles for a picture called The Wanderer's Return that was scheduled to begin editing the following week, the revisions having been requested by the director, a man named Howard Bell, who had specific opinions about titles, and who communicated these opinions in the form of complaints rather than requests. The complaints being informative about what he did not want, and requiring translation into what he did want, the translation being Frances's work and the work she was best at. The translation requiring not only the writing but the understanding of what the complaint was actually about, which was often not what the complaint appeared to be about. She was reading the revised titles as she walked, which was the habit of a person who uses the available time rather than waiting for a designated time, and she was not paying the full attention to the path that the path required, which was why she walked into the man coming around the corner of the costume warehouse at a pace that suggested he also was not paying the full attention to the path that the path required. The collision being the product of two people equally at fault in a way that distributed the fault so evenly that the fault became irrelevant, and what remained was the fact of the collision and the papers on the ground, and the two people looking at each other and then at the papers. He said, "I am sorry." She was already picking up the papers, which told him something. He crouched to help, and she said, "I have them." He picked up the two that had landed farthest from her and looked at them before handing them over, which was the reflex of a person who reads things, and she noticed him reading before she could say, "Don't." He read for 3 seconds and looked at her and said, "These are titles." She said, "Yes." He said, "For the Wanderer's Return." She said, "Yes." He said, "Howard Bell's picture." She said, "Yes." He said, "Howard Bell hates titles." She said, "I know." He said, "He thinks titles are a failure of the image." She said, "I know what he thinks." She took the papers from him. He stood. She stood. He said, "They are good. The titles." She looked at him. He said, "The third one especially. The one about the harbor." She said, "The harbor title is new. The original was about the ship." He said, "The harbor is better than the ship." She said, "Yes." He said, "Does Bell know?" She said, "He will in an hour." He said, "He will complain about it." She said, "I know." He said, "He will be wrong." She said, "I know that too." He said, "I am Thomas Vane." She said, "Francis Doyle." He said, "Story department." She said, "Yes." He said, "I direct." She said, "Which pictures?" He named 2. She had seen both. She had opinions about both that she did not offer, because he had not asked, and because the collision on the path outside the costume warehouse was not the occasion for opinions about his pictures, the occasion being the collision, and the titles, and the harbor, and the fact that they were both late for wherever they were going. She said, "I have to bring these to Bell." He said, "I will walk with you." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I am going to the editing rooms, and Bell's office is on the way." She considered this. She said, "All right." They walked across the lot toward the production building. In the April morning that Hollywood made in April, the morning light at the specific angle of early April in Southern California, that made the standing sets look both more real and more obviously constructed than they looked at other times of day, the light revealing the seams and the scaffolding while simultaneously making the color of the fake New York brownstones, the color that brownstones actually were in the early morning in New York, which was a contradiction that the lot produced regularly, and that Francis had stopped finding strange after the first 6 weeks. He asked about the titles, not generally but specifically about the process, about how she decided what a scene required, about the difference between a title that told you what was happening and a title that told you what was true about what was happening. The distinction being one he articulated precisely enough that she knew he had been thinking about it, rather than producing it in the moment. She said, "Most directors want the first kind." He said, Most directors are wrong about what they want. She said, yes. He said, Bell is wrong about titles entirely, but he is right about the harbor. She said, Bell did not say the harbor was right. He said, he will. He said it with the confidence of a person who has worked with Howard Bell long enough to know how Howard Bell's wrong opinions eventually arrived at right conclusions, which was the specific knowledge of someone who had been in the industry long enough to know the people in it as they actually were, rather than as they presented themselves. She delivered the titles to Bell's office and left before Bell had finished reading them, because Bell's reading was the reading of a man who read with his complaints already prepared and who was going to complain regardless of what he read. And the complaining required Francis's presence only when the complaints contained information, which they occasionally did, and which the first reading rarely produced. She would come back in the afternoon when the complaints had matured into something more specific. Thomas was not in the corridor when she came out. She walked back across the lot toward the story department and thought about the harbor title and about the 3 seconds he had spent reading before he said they were good, and about the distinction he had made between titles that told you what was happening and titles that told you what was true about what was happening, which was the distinction she had been trying to explain to Gerald Cross for 4 months and had not been able to articulate in a form that Cross understood, the form he had produced in a corridor outside Bell's office, in a sentence being the form she had been looking for. She wrote it down when she got back to her desk. Not his sentence, but what his sentence had clarified about her own thinking, which was the way that other people's articulations of things you know work, not by telling you something you did not know, but by giving you the language for something you knew without language, the language making the thing available to use in a way that the knowing without language did not. She saw him again on Thursday at the commissary, which was where the people who worked on the lot ate lunch and where the specific social geography of a studio lot was visible in its most concentrated form, the geography being organized by the hierarchy that the industry produced and that the commissary reproduced in the arrangement of who sat with whom, the directors at certain tables, and the writers at certain tables, and the actors at certain tables, and the crossings between tables being themselves information about the relationships and the work and the specific alliances that the work produced. He was at a table with 2 other directors and a man she recognized as a cinematographer named Walsh. He saw her come in and said something to the table and stood and came over to where she was standing with her tray. He said, "Sit with us." She said, "I do not know your table." He said, "Now you will." She sat with his table for 40 minutes. The 2 other directors were men named Park and Ellison, who had opinions about everything, and expressed them with the confidence of people who have been told their opinions matter often enough to have stopped questioning whether they do. Walsh said almost nothing and had the specific quality of a person who listens so carefully that the listening itself is a form of contribution. Thomas talked about a picture he was developing, a story set in San Francisco in the 1890s, about a woman who runs a shipping company after her husband's death, a story that the studio had bought 6 months ago and that had been in development since then, without resolving into a script that he felt was the script the story required. Francis said, "What is wrong with the current script?" He looked at her. Park said, "Everything." Ellison said, "The 3rd act." Thomas said, The woman. He said, "The woman in the current script does what the story requires her to do. She does not do what a woman in that situation would actually do." Park said, "Audiences do not want what a woman in that situation would actually do." Thomas said, "I think Park is wrong about audiences." He said it directly, without heat, the directness being the directness of a person who has been having this argument for some time and has not changed his position, and is not going to. Park said, "The last 3 pictures that gave women what they would actually do lost money." Thomas said, "The last 3 pictures that gave women what the studio thought audiences wanted were bad pictures." Francis said, "Both things can be true." Both men looked at her. Thomas looked at her with the specific expression of a person encountering a sentence that was better than the sentence they were looking for. He said, "Yes, both things can be true." He said, "That is the title." Park said, "What title?" Francis said, "For the scene where she decides to keep the company." Thomas said, "Yes." Walsh said, "For the first time in 40 minutes. Write that down." Francis wrote it on the back of the menu card. She gave the menu card to Thomas when she left the table. He looked at it. He said, "Both things can be true." She said, "For the harbor scene, when she decides." He said, "Which harbor scene?" She said, "The one you have not written yet, but will need." He looked at her. She said, "A woman who takes over a shipping company in San Francisco in the 1890s will have a scene at the harbor where she decides something." He said, "What does she decide?" She said, "That is your picture." He said, "Yes," he said, "but you know what she decides." She looked at him. She said, "She decides that both things being true is not a reason not to do the thing." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Come to the story session on Friday." She said, "I work for Gerald Cross." He said, "I will talk to Cross." He talked to Cross. Cross told her on Thursday afternoon that she had been assigned to the San Francisco picture, in addition to her current title's work, the assignment being temporary and subject to review, which was Cross's way of managing the politics of a temporary assignment that the person being assigned to it understood was not temporary in any meaningful sense, the temporary being the form the assignment had to take to be acceptable to the people whose acceptance it required. The story sessions were on Monday and Friday mornings in a room on the second floor of the production building that had a table long enough for 8 people and windows that faced east and that admitted the morning light at the angle that made the room feel like the thinking was happening in the right place at the right time, which was not nothing when the thinking was about what made a scene true rather than merely present. Thomas ran the sessions with the specific manner of a director, who understood that the story session was not a meeting, but a form of work, the form requiring different things from different people, and his job being to know what those things were and to create the conditions for them, which he did by asking questions rather than making pronouncements, and by treating a good question from anyone at the table as more valuable than a conclusive statement from himself. Francis said things in the sessions that the sessions needed said. This was not a modest description, but an accurate one. She had the specific quality of a person who speaks when she has something to say, and does not speak when she does not, which was rarer than it should have been in a room full of people who were paid to have things to say, and who therefore said things whether or not the things needed saying. Thomas noticed the quality immediately, which told her something about him, and began directing questions to her specifically when the questions were the kind that required the quality she had, which told her more. The San Francisco picture was called Harbor Light, and the script they were developing over April and May had the specific quality of a script that was becoming something rather than being executed, the becoming being the better state for a script to be in, because it meant the script was still capable of surprising the people making it, which was the condition under which the best scripts were made, the condition of not knowing exactly what you had until you had it, the knowing coming from the having rather than preceding it. She wrote titles for the harbor scene in the 3rd week of April. Not the titles that would be in the finished picture, but the titles she wrote to understand what the scene was. The writing being a form of thinking rather than a form of production. The thinking producing clarity about what the scene required that the scene itself could then be written toward. She brought them to Thomas on a Wednesday afternoon, not in a session but in his office, because the titles were not for the session but for him, for the specific use of a director who needed to know what a scene was before he could direct it toward being what it was. He read them in his office while she sat across from him. He read them the way he had read the Wanderer's return titles in the corridor, completely and in sequence, not skimming, but reading each one with the full attention that reading something you are trying to understand requires. He finished and looked at her and said, "The 4th title." She said, "Yes." He said, "That is what she decides at the harbor." She said, "Yes." He said, "Both things being true is not a reason not to do the thing." She said, "That is the 4th title, not the scene." He said, "The scene is the 4th title made visible." He looked at her. He said, "Francis." She said, "Yes." He said, "Where did you learn to do this?" She said, "I do not know how to answer that." He said, "You write what things are, not what they look like, what they are." She said, "That is what titles are for." He said, "Most title writers do not know that." She said, "I know." He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because I have read the titles in 200 pictures, and most of them are about what things look like." She left his office at 6 in the evening and walked across the lot in the May light that Hollywood made in May. The light warm and long, and the lot quieter at 6 than it was at any other hour. The specific quiet of a place that has been full of work all day and is releasing the work into the evening air, the work having been done or not done, and the doing or not doing being finished for the day, and what remained being the lot in the evening light, with its medieval castle and its French cafe and its New York brownstones, in the colors that the May light made them. She thought about the 4th title. She thought about what Thomas had said about writing what things are rather than what they look like. She thought about the harbor scene and about the woman who ran the shipping company, and about the decision the woman made at the harbor, and about the 4th title being the decision made visible in 12 words, the 12 words being the compression of something that the scene would take 3 minutes to show, the compression being not a reduction, but a distillation, the distillation being what titles were when titles were what they should be. She thought about Thomas reading the titles in the corridor in April, and about the table at the commissary, and about the story sessions, and about his office at 6 in the evening, and about the specific quality of working with a person who understood what the work was for, which was a quality she had not encountered in 14 months in Hollywood, and that she had begun to think was not present in the industry in the form she was looking for. The form being a person who could do the thing and who understood what the thing was and who was interested in the thing, rather than in the thing's results. The interest in the thing being different from the interest in the results in ways that produced different work and a different kind of day and a different quality of the hours spent doing the work. She was thinking about this when she realized she was thinking about Thomas Vane rather than about the work, which was a distinction she noted with the accuracy she brought to all distinctions, and filed in the category of things that are noted without being acted on, which was a large category and which she immediately recognized as insufficient for what this particular thing required. The insufficiency being not a problem, but information. Information about the category having reached its capacity, and the thing requiring a different category. A category she did not yet have a name for, and did not need a name for, because the thing itself was the name. The story sessions continued through May. Thomas directed Harbor Light through June and July, which meant he was on set in the mornings and in the editing room in the afternoons, and available for story work in the evenings, when the story work was the kind that could not wait for the shooting to be finished. Frances continued her titles work for the story department and came to the Harbor Light sessions in the evenings when the sessions were called, which was 3 or 4 evenings a week, the evenings being the evenings of a production in the middle of filming, which was long and specific, and had the quality of evenings that are spent doing work that matters, rather than work that fills the time, the distinction being visible in the quality of the attention in the room. She saw him on the set twice in June, both times by accident, and both times at the specific moment when a scene was being prepared rather than filmed. The preparation being the part of directing that most people did not see, and that Frances found more interesting than the filming, the preparation being where the decisions were made, and the filming being where the decisions were executed, the execution requiring its own attention, but the decisions being where the picture was actually made. He was different on set than in the story sessions, which was not surprising but was interesting, the difference being the difference between a person thinking and a person acting on what the thinking had produced, the acting having a quality that the thinking did not, and requiring things from him that the thinking did not require. She watched him work with the actress who played the woman who ran the shipping company, an actress named Clara Marsh, who was 27 and had been in pictures since she was 19, and who had the specific quality of an actress who understood the difference between performing a character and being what the character was in a given moment, the difference being visible on screen in a way that audiences felt without being able to name. Thomas talked to Clara Marsh before the harbor scene in a way that Frances could not hear from where she was standing, but that produced in the actress's face and body the specific change that a director produces when what they say is the thing the actress needed to hear rather than the thing the director needed to say, the change being visible in the way a key fits a lock, the before and the after being different in a way that was complete rather than incremental. Frances thought about this on the walk back to the story department building. She thought about the difference between what a director needs to say and what an actress needs to hear, and about how Thomas had found the thing that was both simultaneously, which was the same problem as the harbor title, the problem of finding the sentence that was both what the thing looked like and what the thing was, the harbor title being the solution she had found for the written version, and what she had just watched being the solution he had found for the directed version, the two solutions being different forms of the same answer. She told him this in the story session that evening. She said, "The thing you said to Clara Marsh before the harbor scene." He looked at her. She said, "I could not hear it." He said, "It was about the fourth title." She said, "I know." He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because of what happened in her face afterward." He was quiet for a moment. He said, I told her what the fourth title meant. She said, not what it said. He said no. She said, what it meant. He said, yes. They looked at each other across the story table with the evening light coming through the east windows at the low angle that June evenings produced. The light at the angle that made the table and the papers on it, and the two people sitting at it, look the way things look when they are being seen clearly, the specific quality of clarity that the right light produces. He said, Frances. She said yes. He said, I would like to take you to dinner, not a session. He said it with the directness he brought to everything that mattered to him, the directness being not aggressive, but present, the presence being what made it directness rather than demand. She said, where? He said, there is a restaurant on Cahuenga that does not look like Hollywood. She said, what does it look like? He said, like a place where people eat dinner. She said, that is specific. He said, I have been thinking about it since April. She looked at him. She said, since the corridor. He said, since the corridor. She said, you have been thinking about dinner since April. He said, I have been thinking about a great many things since April. Dinner is the thing I am naming. She was quiet for a moment. She said, Friday. He said, Friday. They had dinner on Friday at the restaurant on Cahuenga that did not look like Hollywood, which looked instead like a room where people ate dinner, in the way that rooms that have been used for dinner for a long time look like what they are, the accumulated use producing the specific patina of a place that knows its purpose and has been serving it long enough to do it without effort. They talked for 3 hours about the picture and about the industry and about Ohio and about the specific character of a person who comes to Hollywood from a small city in Ohio with $80 and a portfolio of titles she wrote herself and does not leave. The not leaving being a form of information about the person that the staying continued to provide. He asked about Zanesville. She told him about the theater on Maple Street, where she had seen her first picture at age 9, and about the specific quality of the experience, the lights going down, and the piano starting, and the screen coming alive with movement, and the understanding arriving, not as a thought but as a physical fact, that the world was larger than Zanesville, and that the largeness was accessible from Zanesville through the screen being the window that Zanesville had not known it had until the theater on Maple Street opened in 1910. He said, that is why you write titles. She said, what do you mean? He said, you understood at 9 that the screen was a window. You have been trying to make the window clear ever since. She looked at him. She said, that is the thing I have been trying to say for 4 years. He said, I know. He said, I could hear it in the titles from the first day. He told her about a city in Connecticut called Bridgeport, where he had grown up, and about a father who had been an engineer and who had taken him to the Nickelodeon in 1908 when he was 8 years old, and about the specific quality of the experience, which was not the window that Frances had seen but something else, something about the mechanics of how the window worked, the boy who became Thomas Vane having been interested not in the world beyond the screen but in the screen itself, in how the screen produced the world it produced, in the specific mechanics of the illusion, the interest in the mechanics being what had made him a director rather than a writer or an actor, the director being the person who was responsible for the mechanics. She said, you understand the mechanics, and I understand the window. He said, yes. She said, that is why the sessions work. He said, yes, he said, and why I have been thinking about dinner since April. She said, "The sessions work because we see different things." He said, "Yes." She said, "And the dinner?" He said, "The dinner works because we see different things and we want to see the same things." She looked at him across the restaurant table with the dinner around them, and the evening around the dinner, and the city around the evening. The city being Hollywood in June of 1924, and being therefore a specific place in a specific time with its own specific character. The character being the character of a place that was in the process of inventing itself and knew it. The invention being conducted by the people in the room and the people in the rooms around it, and the people on the lots, and in the story departments, and in the editing rooms, and in the theaters, in every city in the country, where the pictures they were making played to the people who needed the window. And she thought about the screen at the theater on Maple Street in Zanesville in 1910, and about the window it had been, and about the picture they were making, and about the titles she was writing for it, and about the man across the table who understood the mechanics of how the window worked, and who had been thinking about dinner since April. And she said, "Yes." He said, "Yes, what?" She said, "Yes to what you said about seeing the same things." He said, "I know." He said, "I have known since the corridor." She said, "So have I." He said, "Then we have known since April, and this is June, and dinner has taken longer than it should have." She said, "The harbor title was not finished until May." He said, "I know." He said the harbor title was worth waiting for. She said, "So was dinner." They left the restaurant at 11 and walked on Cahuenga in the June night that Hollywood made, the night warm and the street quiet and the city having the specific quality of a city that is making things and has not yet finished making them and will not finish making them. Because the making is what the city is, the making being continuous, and the things being made being the things that the people in the Zanesville theaters and the Chicago theaters and the New York theaters needed from the screen, needed from the window, needed in the specific way of people who understand that the world is larger than the place they are in, and who need the proof of that understanding renewed regularly. The renewal being what the pictures provided, and what Francis's titles made clear, and what Thomas's direction made visible. The two things being different forms of the same answer. The answer being, yes, the world is larger. Yes, you are right to believe it. Yes, the window is real. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked at her, in the way he had looked at the fourth title in his office in May, with the complete attention of a person who is reading something carefully because the thing is worth reading carefully. She looked back at him with the attention she brought to things that were worth attending to, which was the full kind, the kind that does not hold anything back for later because later is not the moment, and the moment is what there is. He said, "I would like this to continue." She said, "The picture or the dinner?" He said, "Both." She said, "The picture ends in September." He said, "The dinner does not end in September." She said, "No." He said, "Francis." She said, "Yes." He said, "Both things being true." She said, "Is not a reason not to do the thing." He said, "No." She said, "I know." He said, "I know you know." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes." They walked back through Hollywood in the June night, through the city that was making itself and had not yet finished, past the theaters on Hollywood Boulevard, where the pictures played and the windows opened into the larger world, and the people in the seats understood what the 9-year-old in the Zanesville theater had understood in 1910, which was that the screen was a window, and the window was real, and the world was larger than the place you were in. And the proof of this was available for a nickel on a Thursday afternoon. And the proof was true.